Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Sina Sekheche, and this lesson is brought to you by the Free State Department of Education in collaboration with Pagama Research and Development. Right, so as we are continuing with our ATP, let us check what topic we'll be doing for today. So we will be doing a new topic, that is evolution. However, this is such a huge topic, it takes about 54 marks of your paper too. But we are going to divide this topic into 3 sections. So the first section will be the introduction to evolution, and then we will do our evolution by natural selection, where we are exploring the 2 theories or the 3 theories of evolution, and then we will do our human evolution lastly. So for today's lesson, we are going to be doing evolution through natural selection. Right, so let us take a look at the objectives that we want to achieve at the end of this lesson. So at the end of this lesson, like always, you should be able to do all of these things. So let us start with the first one. The first one, you should be able to define what is biological evolution. And remember, for your terminology, you always have to consult your exam guideline. The exam guideline is the document that will give you the precise definition that you want for your terminology in life sciences. Then you should be able to differentiate between a hypothesis and a theory. Sometimes these words can be used interchangeably, or they can be confused with one another. When a person wants to say a theory, they might say it's a hypothesis, or a hypothesis is a theory. So at the end of this lesson, you should be able to know what is the difference between the two, because we will be talking about evolution as a theory. Then you'll understand why we say it's a theory, it is not a hypothesis, or it is not law. We will explain that later. Then you should know the role of the following as evidence for evolution. As we are studying evolution as a theory, we want to see what evidence was there or was provided before for evolution. So you must know how fossil records were used to provide evidence for evolution, how biogeography was used to provide evidence for evolution, and these 2 topics are linking to grade 10. Remember, in grade 10 you studied just a little bit of the fossils, where you were looking even at the coelacanth, the living fossil, and then you checked how the sediments are formed in grade 10. So we're going to link this information to that study that you did in grade 10 when you were studying the fossils. And then biogeography also we learned in grade 10. We will see how biogeography formed evidence or supported the theory for evolution. Then modification by descent. What do we mean by modification by descent? We mean homologous structures. So how were the structures modified as the organisms kept on progressing? So we will see the structures there, and we'll see how they were modified. So the structures that we will see are the homologous structures. And then also be able to tell us the role that genetics played to give us evidence for evolution. Then you must also be able to define a biological species and a population. Remember, later on when we are doing topics such as speciation, these 2 terms are going to be very important, the species and population. So you must be able to use them at the correct place. So you must know how to define what is a species and what is population. Right? Continuing, you must be able to review the contribution of each of the following to variation that exists among individuals of the same species. So variation, the term here is variation. So you need to know how did the following things contribute towards variation. So this is what is meant. So you need to tell us how meiosis contributes towards variation, how crossing over in meiosis contributed towards variation, random arrangement of chromosomes. So all of these, you can say that is all meiosis. And then mutation, random fertilization, random mating, and then you need to lastly be able to review what is continuous variation and discontinuous variation. And I know also these two, most of the learners make mistakes in the examination when they have to tell us the type of variation that is listed. They would want to list these sources of variation, but the two types of variations are continuous and discontinuous. Then we will check what is the meaning thereof and what is the meaning of discontinuous. So I think we are ready to start. So I know that most of you have already thought about this topic, which is evolution. And you might have some misconceptions that you have about evolution. Some of them, they may be stemming from your religious background, some of them from your social background, some of them from scientific backgrounds. However, for you to be able to pass this topic, I will require you to focus on evolution as a science, as a scientist. So your approach should be that of a scientist, so you can be able to gather the facts and study the topic for you to pass the exam. So I know you have thought about it, but let us check the scientific way of how evolution was explained. So I want you to take just 10 seconds to look at this video here. Right. For some people, they think that things are happening just as this video is depicted. To say a fish became a human being, or we evolved from a plant, from a seed nidara, or from what? That is not what evolution is. But evolution, however, is this. Now, all the processes that have transformed life on Earth, from its earliest forms to the vast diversity that characterizes life on Earth today. So our evolution, this is just a general idea to say evolution brought us all this vast diversity that we have. And it brought this vast diversity from what? From the earliest forms of life. Hence you see this video here, you see organisms from the simplest to the most complex. So from the earliest forms of life to what we have now, the vast diversity, all those processes that took place, they were bringing us evolution. Right. So all these changes that happen from the beginning or from the earliest forms of life, we are not talking only about the physical changes, but all these changes must be in the genes. Because if you only focus on the changes that are on the physical characteristic, that is where you are going to get lost. But now let us take a look at a deeper explanation of what evolution is according to your exam guideline. So, biological evolution, it is a process. It can be gradual or rapid in modern times. So this is just an extra information. So it is a process by which populations, very important, this is the word that we said we must know, change over time into different or more complex form. This change is going to be in response to a change in their immediate environment. So the change is going to be brought about by the environment in which they are found. So what does this statement mean? It means the populations are going to change over time. And remember, this happens over millions and millions of years. So the populations that you will see today, they may have changed over time because of their environment. So that is what the general term of population means. So what does that mean to you? So it means that all present day life forms, so what you see today, has descended from, so what you see today has descended from or has come from, or they are related to those that lived in the past. However, they may look different because they have become modified. So they today is related or descended from those that lived in the past. They are different because they are now modified. So these are the aspects that you need to look out for when you are explaining the terminology, when you are explaining biological evolution. To say all present life or all present day life forms has descended from. To descended, to say, is to come from. If we want to simplify that way, to say they have descended from and are related to those that lived in the past. And they may look different because they have become modified. Remember, this modification happens genetically, and that can be because of the environment that we find today. So if we take a look at these diagrams here of the modern horse, all of you have seen a modern horse, right? So today, this is the modern horse that we see. But what are we saying? We are saying this modern horse that we see today has descended from, or it is related. Let's just write related to those ones that were found where? In the past. So this one will say it was in the past. So this modern horse that you see today, it is related or it has descended from these ones that were found in the past. However, they look different from this one to this one to this one. They look different. Why? Okay, this one and this one look different. Let's say the first horse, modern horse, looks different from the first horse, which is the Eohippus. So it is not called the modern horse because it's the Eohippus. It's another species. So this Eohippus that we used to have in the past is not looking the same as the modern horse because over the years they have become different and they have become modified. Why were they modified? They were modified because they had to adapt to their environment. So we have now seen evolution in practice. The terminology to say, okay, now I understand what the term means to say that organisms or all present day life forms has descended from those that lived in the past. However, they may look different because they have become modified from one generation to the other. So you see, up until you find the modern horse. So that is how you are going to explain biological evolution. Make sure that you have all these aspects for you to get full marks. Because if some of these aspects are not there, you will not be explaining the full term of what evolution is. Right. Going forward, evolution is taken as a theory. Now, the theory of evolution is regarded as a scientific theory, since various hypotheses relating to evolution have been tested and verified over time. So for something to become a theory, it needs to have been tested by different scientists and it must be verified, meaning they must be getting to at least the same common conclusion. Then we can accept it as a theory. So evolution, because most of the scientists, when they were investigating this topic of evolution, all of them are coming to almost the same conclusion, then it is accepted as a theory. But when they were doing their investigations, what is it that they were focusing on? Or what is it that they used to gather evidence or that supported their hypothesis at the beginning to say, now this is the theory of evolution? So they used different evidences. So the first evidence that we used for evolution in general for you to support any form of evolution that you are investigating, you need fossil records. So the fossil records are going to provide evidence. So when you do your study or you conduct your study, you are going to study the fossils, how they were formed and their structures, and they will give you information of how organisms have descended or how organisms are related. So those fossils are fossils of organisms that lived in the past. So they are used as evidence for evolution. The second type of evidence that is used is modification by descent. This is where the comparative anatomy is used, where scientists compare the structures of the organisms to say this one is a bird, it has 5 limbs or it has a wing, and this one is a bird, it has a wing also. Then somehow they can establish a relation there. So they are using what? The anatomy. We call it comparative anatomy of organisms to check their structures. Then they also use biogeography. Biogeography, we will do an example to check how biogeography can be used as evidence for evolution, where organisms are found or where were they on the earth. Let's just say on the whole earth. So they can use that information to tell us how they are related or they may have shared a common ancestor. The last one that they use as evidence for evolution is genetics. Now this one, when they do a genetic study and check all the sequences of the amino acids, they will then be able to tell us that the amino acids of one particular organism are the same as the amino acids of the other, or they share 20% or 30%. That is also establishing what? Relatedness. And the relatedness that is going to tell us about the common ancestor. Therefore, we can say evolution took place there. So all of these, you need to know how they were used to provide evidence for evolution. Then as for human evolution, what was used to support the theory of human evolution? The scientists use fossil records of the hominid species. If you go to Marupeng, the cradle of humankind, this is where some of them, you're going to see the Sterfontein caves. This is a place where some of these fossils were found that were used to support the human evolution. Some came from Africa, Kenya, they came from all over the place in Europe, but all of them, they supported the evolution of hominids or the human evolution. And then they also can use cultural evidence, things that they find, artifacts that they find in the caves where these earliest humans lived. Then they can use those to support that humans have evolved from this particular species to this particular species. Remember, when we say they have evolved, we don't say they were given birth by. We say they shared a common ancestor which has the same characteristics that as them. So they are not the descendants as in they were given birth by. Please don't make that mistake. Right. And then also genetics, the genetic composition of the earliest forms of the humans were also taken and compared to the others, or in the hominid species also, you can take all the genetic components and compare it. So scientists use all of this as evidence to support their theory of evolution. And then the theory for the out of Africa hypothesis. Out of Africa hypothesis, we will deal with. This is the last topic that we are going to deal with on our big topic of evolution. This is where it says that all hominid species descended, or the earliest form were found in Africa. So there is evidence that was also used to support this. So fossil records were used. So you need to know which fossils were found to support this out of Africa hypothesis. So scientists use fossils to support that theory. Also, cultural evidence, all the tools, the artifacts, whatever that they found that was used by the earliest forms of the humans, they used it to support their hypothesis or their theory of out of Africa hypothesis. And then genetics also. Genetics plays a very huge role, because then it can eliminate all other doubts, because genetics they speak for themselves. So genetics was also used to compare the amino acids and the sequences and the numbers that we find in all these species to support a out of Africa hypothesis. So, evolution is not law yet. You know, in science, those of you who are doing physical sciences, you are going to study the Newton's laws of motion, Newton's first law of motion or second law. The law is like that, it stays like that. Even if you want to investigate, you will still find the same results. Not similar, not related to, but it's the same. So it is a fact, it is that way. The law of gravity. We all know when you put something up, it will definitely go down, whether you like it or not. If you leave it up without being supported, it will go down. That is the law of gravity. So everyone can see it without it being, without getting different results. However, with evolution, it is a theory. Why? Because not all scientists support it. Some scientists can believe that evolution happened differently from what we've just spoken about right now. And those scientists, they can still do an investigative study and find out how evolution has taken place and give us their own interpretation and their own results. So in that way, it makes evolution to not become law because it is still open for investigation, and some scientists do not agree or do not support the theory that is widely accepted right now. So it is the theory only because it is widely accepted, but it is not law. It has not reached that state of saying this is the law, this is how it happened, and finish and clear. No other explanation can come. Even you seated there, you can still be a scientist and say, but I think evolution took place in this way. And do your study, bring us your evidence, and then you can therefore differ with what is widely accepted now. So for those reasons, it is regarded as a theory and not a law. Right. So let us check the two terms then. What is a hypothesis and what is a theory? You know, when you were doing practical investigations in grade 10, both for life sciences and physical sciences, when you start your investigation, you must have a hypothesis. So what is a hypothesis and what is a theory? So when does a statement become a hypothesis and when does it become a theory? So let us start with the definition. So the first definition is that a hypothesis is a prediction. So here you are predicting of a physical phenomenon that can be tested using observations or experiment. So when are you going to have a hypothesis when you want to conduct a study? You are going to have a hypothesis at the beginning. So you will have a hypothesis before you start doing an investigation. You want to give yourself an explanation or a prediction as to why that physical phenomenon is. Then, what is a theory? So just note this, that this happens at the beginning. A hypothesis, you are going to have it at the beginning. However, with a theory, what is a theory? A theory is a widely, remember I said it is a widely, so wide held explanation of a phenomenon. So here, you are not predicting, you are not guessing. You are giving us that explanation of a phenomenon that is supported by numerous observations, experiments, and scientific evidence. Meaning, a theory will only come when? At the end. At the end, once you have done all the experiments and you can produce evidence, and that evidence is going to do what? To give us an explanation of why that thing is. So with evolution, it is explaining It is a widely explanation. So it is explaining to us how organisms that we see today have evolved from those that lived in the past. By doing what? By giving us scientific evidence. So they did what? Observations and experiments to give us this scientific evidence that will support it as a theory. So this one we accept as a theory because it has been observed, experiments were done, and evidence is already there to explain a phenomenon. So I think now you see. Therefore, we say a theory will come at the end of those experiments, of those observations. But a prediction, you are giving us a prediction where at the beginning you think, but when you write a hypothesis, you don't write it as a guess or a prediction or something that you think. You write it as a statement. Okay, let me write here. You write it as a statement that you are sure of. For an example, let us look for an example here. The high incidence of HIV/AIDS is due to the lack of education about the causes of the disease. Now, this person who wrote this statement is not sure, but they are writing it as if it's something that they are sure of. They are telling us that the high incidence of HIV and AIDS is due to the lack of education about the disease. If you don't know anything, you are going to believe that person. However, if you are a scientist, you will say, let's do a study to test this hypothesis. So a hypothesis needs to be tested. So you still need to test this statement. How are you going to test that statement? By conducting an experiment, by conducting an investigation, doing a study and observation. So that is you now doing what? Testing the hypothesis. Once you have tested the hypothesis, at the end, you can decide whether it is accepted or it is rejected. So you see, hypothesis is open to be tested. It is still open to be tested. So, but when you write it as a statement that you are sure of. You write it as a statement that you are sure of. So this person is telling us that lack of education is what is causing the high incidence of HIV and AIDS. And if you don't know anything, you are going to believe that. But because you are a scientist, you want this to be tested. Then you can decide after the results were shown to you that this can be accepted or rejected. But it is a hypothesis at the beginning. You are giving a guess or a prediction as to why do you think there is a high incidence of HIV. I think now you see what is the difference between a hypothesis or an example of a hypothesis. Let us take a look at the theory. The sun is the center of the universe, around which all the planets revolve. This is called the heliocentric theory. So they are saying that the sun is the center and all the planets evolve around the sun. This is a heliocentric theory. Why is it a theory? Because it has been tested and tested and tested by so many scientists and they agree with it, but not all agree with it. But it is widely accepted that the sun is the center of the universe and all the planets surround it. So when you were doing geography, I think in grade 4, you learned about the planets, you saw how the planets were arranged. So that is a heliocentric theory. So that theory has been tested and tested, and most scientists were agreeing with it. So it is widely accepted that yes, the sun is revolving, and the sun is the center, and then all the planets are revolving around it. So in that way, this is a widely accepted theory because this explanation came at the end when they were doing what? When they were explaining how the sun orbits the earth. Yes. So there are few types of evidence. So these are the types of evidence that we are going to talk about. So I would like for you to check what types of evidence was used for evolution. We've touched on this at the beginning. So fossil records, we know all the fossils that are used today to support the theory of evolution, biogeography, genetic evidence, and cultural evidence. So this is where now we are going to check each one of them. So let us take a look at each and every one of them. So the first one is the fossil records. What are the fossils? So you remember in grade 10, you studied how fossils were formed. So we can say this is fossil formation. Remember the sediments, how the sediments form, and the sediments at the bottom is going to be your oldest sediments or the rock, and then therefore going up to the newest. So the old will be at the bottom, the new will be towards the top. So when you want to calculate the age of these fossils that we find here, these ones are going to be old. Then these ones are going to be new as per these sediments that are formed here. So you remember you studied this in grade 10, and then some of the fossils that can be found are the fossils of the skeleton. You see, like those ones that we said are found at the Sterfontein caves, and you can find fossils of the imprint. So you see this one is an imprint on a rock. And then you can find also fossils of the skeletons of the earliest forms of organisms that you cannot see today. You see here is the fossil of a dinosaur. None of us has ever seen a dinosaur because they are extinct. But however, we learn about the dinosaurs because of the evidence that was left, the fossil evidence that was left, and the paleontologists can be able to interpret that information and make it easy for us. So the oldest rock of the strata are found deepest in the earth, while the youngest rocks occur near the surface. So we've already spoken about that now. These ones are the youngest ones, and these ones are the old. So these ones, if they are old, these ones are young and new. In terms of aging or fossil dating of the fossils, then you remember the two methods that are used to date the fossils or to determine the age of the fossils or when they existed on Earth. And then fossils are the organisms that are found in the deepest strata. Therefore, they lived on Earth much longer ago than those species that are fossilized near the surface. So you know that when scientists are looking for fossils, they dig. You know that they dig deeper and deeper and deeper. It's because they want to go to the earliest forms of the organisms. And this information, they dug it so that it can support evolution, or it can give us evidence that organisms that lived in the past, they were like this. And remember, these people are skilled. They can tell us what type of food these organisms were eating, what type of life they were living, what type of whatever that information they will extract from these fossils, they'll be able to interpret and put it to us into simpler terms. So that is how fossils are used to support the theory of evolution, because these fossils, when we date them, they can tell us that this organism lived on Earth 2 million years ago. Then we can say, because it lived 2 million years ago, and there was another one that lived 1 million years ago, and they look a little bit similar, we can take a look at their structures, they look a little bit similar, then we can say somehow these two organisms were related, or they shared a common ancestor. So the fossils gives us that information. And then we come to the second one, which is biogeography. So what is biogeography? As you remember that we learn through geography that the land was one big mass when it started. So that big mass did what? It separated into two large masses. So it was big one, that is called the Pangea. It was all connected. However, as time went on, due to continental drift, the water divided the landmass into two sections, which we call the Laurasia and the Gondwana. But then it did not stop there. As the years went on and on, continental drift continued and the land masses divided further into these continents. So you see, it has divided further and further into this modern world that we see today. So this also can give us evidence for evolution. How so? The effect of continental drift on biogeography is that it provides evidence for evolution of ancient species. So, ancient species, we can tell which species were living here. And they were living here, and here, and here. Because once you start finding them here, you want to check how are they related, or do they look similar, or do they look different? Then you can tell now if this one looks a little bit similar than the one that we find on the south. Let's say you found one on the north, and then you see there's another one that you found on the south. Then you see some similarities and characteristics that are common. Then you can come to a conclusion to say, at one stage, these organisms were living in one area. So because they are related. And then, for example, we can look at the flightless birds of the southern hemispheres. Here in Africa, look at Africa. We know the ostrich. Everyone is familiar with the ostrich, I hope. This is the ostrich that we all know here in Africa, including South Africa. Now, when you go to South America, you find something that looks like an ostrich, but it is called a rhea. And it does not look exactly like the ostrich that you see in Africa. However, you can tell now, but these two organisms, they are somehow related, or they may have arose from a common ancestor. Then you go to Australia. Australia, you find different types of you find the emu. Now, you still see the emu is somehow a little bit like the rhea that you find in South America. And then in New Zealand, you find the kiwi. And then in Papua New Guinea, you find the cassowary. So all of these birds that are flightless, meaning they cannot fly, all of them, they share some common characteristics that show that at some stage we can say that when the land, or when all of this land was one, all of these were occupying the same, or the ancestor. The ancestor of all of these was occupying that landmass. However, when continental drift happened, these organisms changed. Remember, they look different because they changed due to the environmental factors. They had to adapt to the different environment, and therefore making them to look different than their original ancestor, which we do not have the ancestor at the moment. But we know that there should have been a common ancestor where all of these organisms took their characteristics from. So biogeography can tell us that these organisms might have occupied the same land or lived in the same land before continental drift happened. So they are related. Remember, for evolution, we are trying to trace the relatedness of these organisms to their common ancestor, and also to each and every one of them. I hope biogeography and continental drift makes sense how these organisms evolve. Right. then biogeography in that way is going to provide evidence for evolution. Then I would like us to look at these questions. I'm going to give you 5 minutes because you still need to understand and study this diagram and the map exactly for the next question also. So please make sure that you see what is happening on this diagram. Check the key things that you find. Look at the names here of these organisms and check where do you find them in all these land masses, or we can say continents. Then you are going to answer these questions. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to go through this diagram and answer question number 1 and question number 2A and 2B. Right. So I hope you had enough time to study the diagram as to what is happening and where do you find each of these species. So name the supercontinent from which the land masses shown on the map had originated. So what was that supercontinent where all of them were all joined together? We're going to call it the Gondwana land. The Gondwana land was when all of them were one. Then, from the map, identify two reptiles common to both Africa and South America. So you go and check. This is Africa. This is South America. So which two organisms or reptiles do you find in both these two land masses? So you'll check here. This is the first one. This is the first one. Now, is it the only one where you find both in Africa and South America? No, you can go down here and check. There is another one there. I know most of you must have missed that one. So, what are they? You look at the structure. So, you see this one looks like this one. And this one looks like this one. So, what is the answer there? Yes, you have the Cynognathus. So, the Cynognathus is this one. The one there at the top. Then you have the ones there at the bottom, the ones that remains of the freshwater reptiles. This is the Mesosaurus. I hope you managed to get those two correct because this question was straightforward. However, it needed you to look closely into your map and see which reptiles occupy both land masses. Now, moving on to the next question. Name two land masses on which the Lystrosaurus had existed. So the Lystrosaurus is this one. You look at the shape. So in which two land masses were the Lystrosaurus found? So the Lystrosaurus. So would you say this one is the Lystrosaurus? Yes, you look at the shape. The shape of this diagram is, you see, it's found here. Here, where I'm drawing a dot. Here's another one. Here is another one. So, which land masses can you write there? The first one, can it be Africa? Yes. Africa, here it is in Africa, the first big red dot. India, yes, here it is there in India, the second big red dot. And Antarctica, so this is Antarctica, the last big red dot. So you were just required to do what? To interpret the diagram and answer this simple question. So some of these questions are free marks. Please make sure that you collect those marks. Continue with this question. Remember, now we're not going to give you plenty of time because you've already studied the diagram. You understand what is happening on this diagram. So let us check the next question. The next question says, state the phenomenon related to the Earth's history that the fossil data shown on the map supports. So, this data, which phenomenon of the Earth's history does it support? What was happening there? What is it showing us? I know. It is showing us this phenomenon that the land masses were once joined over time and they had split apart. Or you can just say it shows us continental drift has taken place. So this proves that continental drift has taken place. So that is the phenomenon that is shown by that diagram. Then I would like us to look closely here at what is happening. Let us read the statement and check. The present-day distribution of the three closely related species of the dog family, the coyote, jackal, and the dingo. So you see, the coyote is found here, the jackal, so we can say one, the coyote, 2 is the jackal, 3 is the dingo. And you see they are found on the different land masses. So it is shown on the world map here. So what type of evidence for evolution is represented here? We've just spoken about that. And then we are going to explain what is a biological species. This is a term that we need to be able to define at the end of our lesson. So I'm going to give you 1 minute just to define biological species, and answer number 1, tell us what type of evidence for evolution is represented here. So I'm giving you 1 minute. Right. So number 1 says, what type of evidence for evolution is represented here? So this one is a bonus mark that you can just collect. This is biogeography. So once you see different species or different species of organisms, then you need to check where are they. If there's a map, somehow that thing should tell you it is biogeography. Then we come to the interesting organism. So this one, it says the 3 closely related species of the dog. So we want to know, what is this term species? Why can't we just say dogs or population of dogs? What is a species? A species are organisms that share the same or that are similar, that are able to interbreed, and they can produce a fertile offspring. Your definition of a species should have all 3 aspects for it to be correct. Because if these organisms are able to interbreed, some of them may not produce a fertile offspring. If they cannot produce a fertile offspring, they are not of the same species. An example can be that one of a donkey and a horse. Some people may think that a donkey and a horse, because they are similar, because they are able to interbreed, they are of the same species. But no. They are not of the same species. Yes, they are similar. Yes, they can interbreed. However, they cannot produce a fertile offspring. They can produce what we call a mule. But that mule, you can never have 2 mules producing another mule, meaning that mule is infertile. The only way to get a mule is if you cross or you interbreed a horse and a donkey. So they produce an infertile offspring. So that is an example that can give you that. If organisms are not similar, they are not able to interbreed, and they are not able to produce a fertile offspring, they are not of the same species. Now, for them to be of the same species, the organisms must be similar. They must be able to interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. Then we can say they are organisms of the same species. So you see with these dogs here, you have the dingo, the jackal, and the coyote. They are different species because you cannot take a jackal and a dingo and interbreed them and get a fertile offspring. So they are species that are standing individually. even if they are of the dog family, but they are not the same species. I hope you understand the term biological species there. Then continuing, here's another question. Potters and lemurs are small mammals. Remember, when you come across a question like this, you don't even need to know what the potters are or the lemurs are. Even if you have not heard of what the potters are or what the lemurs are, try to understand the question in its context or in its meaning. What do they mean or what is happening? So for you to be told that they are small mammals, that is enough. Then, scientists believe that potters and lemurs share a common ancestor that existed in Africa. Very important. Presently, potters only occur in Africa. So in Africa, you can just write potters. And then, while the lemurs are only found in Madagascar. So the lemurs are found in Madagascar. This is information that you are gathering from the text. Now, Madagascar is an island off the east coast of Africa as shown in the diagram there. And remember, the other information that you got is that scientists believe that potters and lemurs share a common ancestor. Right. Explain how continental drift could have affected the distribution of the common ancestor. So you want to check. So how did continental drift affect the distribution of the common ancestor? So we will do that as a group. Let's see. There was once one large continent. You get a mark for saying that. Remember, with continental drift, you need to start there. Tell us that the landmass was 1. So there was once one large continent. And then what do you think happened? The common ancestor existed throughout this continent. So you are telling us, yes, the common ancestor appeared throughout the continent. Then what happened? When Madagascar separated, so meaning when continental drift happened here. When Madagascar separated, the common ancestor was found in both regions. So you had the common ancestor in region of the East Africa and also in Madagascar. So that is how the common ancestor must have been distributed because of continental drift. So I want us to move to the next evidence that we use for evolution. Remember, we've done fossils, we've done biogeography. Now we are doing comparative anatomy. So what is comparative anatomy? This is where now they are comparing the structures or the anatomy of these organisms that they found. So when they check the anatomy, they look for homologous structures. So when you were doing genetic, you learned more about this term homologous, meaning the same or similar. So they are looking at homologous structures. Now, as similar organisms adapted to different environments, the function of their appendages changed. So we are looking at these different organisms that you see here. So organisms are going to adapt to different environments, but you may find that they have a similar structure. However, that similar structure changed, or the function of that similar structure changed over time just to accommodate the environment in which these organisms are finding themselves. Now, this result of descent with modification from a common ancestor. How do you see? You are going to trace the anatomy to say, if a human has a humerus and the ulna and the radius, and it has the carpals, the phalanges, the metacarpals, and the phalanges in that order, and then you check the cat. The cat has the same structure, 1, then 1, 2, 1 here, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there, and then it changes when it comes to the claws. But it follows the same structure. And then you come to the whale. The whale, you see there, You can see there's a humerus, ulna, radius, but although they are short, then you see the carpals, then the metacarpals, and then the phalanges are long, because then it needs to accommodate the flap of the whale. And then you see the bed. Also, the structure follows the same. You have one, two, one, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here, and then you see there. This one is going to give what? The bed, the wing of the bird to allow it to fly. However, when you take a look at all of these organisms here, you see that their structures are the same. They are similar, not the same. They are similar. Remember, English is very important here, because when you say something is similar, you're not saying it's actually the same. It's similar. They are similar. However, the functions of those appendages, of all of these are the appendages, you can say, they have changed. For the human beings, you know, you have to touch to hold things up, or to climb up, or to do whatever. The cat also uses them for different things. The whale is going to use them for different things, and the bird is going to use them for a different thing. However, the structure is similar in all of these. So when they were trying to give evidence for evolution, these are some of the things that they were checking. Homologous structures, using what? Comparative anatomy. So I think you understand when we say that. Now, the fact that all mammals have the same pendactyl limb, pendactyl meaning it has all these structures the same way, all 5 in that order, suggests that all mammals descended or originated from a common ancestor. So scientists, once they see this in certain organisms, they can conclude to say, okay, because they follow the same format or the same sequence or the same arrangement, we can say they may have arose from a common ancestor, or they share a common ancestor. So mammals are examples of those because of their limbs, and that the limbs have been modified over time in different species. So in different species, you see here, this is the human species, the cat, the whale, and the bird. So all of these limbs are modified over time to perform the different functions that they need to perform in all of these species. So that is comparative anatomy. Therefore, modifications of skeletons by descent are therefore evidence that can be used to support the theory of evolution. So they check those structures and the arrangement thereof. Right, genetics. When you take a look at this diagram here, it shows you organisms, pairs, and number of amino acid differences. So meaning, when they were comparing the human to the chimpanzee, they were comparing the number of amino acid to check how many are different. Very interesting. Look, for the chimpanzees and the humans, there is none. 0. So we share the same number of amino acids, or the amino acids are similar in the humans and the chimpanzees. With the humans and the fruit fly, there were 29 differences. With the human and the horse, there were 12 differences. The human and the pigeon, 12 differences. Human and the rattlesnake, 14 differences. The human and the rhesus monkey, 1 difference in amino acids. The human and the screwworm fly, 27 differences. The human and the snapping turtle, 15 differences. The human and the tuna fish, 21 differences in the sequences or the number of, in the amino acids, yes, the sequence of the amino acid. So what is this information telling us? It is telling us how related we are. So if we share most of the amino acids, obviously the conclusion there will be we are similar, or we share the closest common ancestor. But the more differences you have, it means you are not closely related. I think this information tells you a story in terms of genetics. Now, the more similar the nucleotide sequence of an organisms are, the more closely related these organisms are. Like, we are closely related to the chimpanzees because we share none. So we share no differences in terms of the amino acids when they were checking our genetic components or our genetic composition. Right. Now, the sequence is about 97% similarity between the sequence of DNA of a human and a chimpanzee. So, DNA of a human and a chimpanzee, there is 97%. And DNA of human to human equals to 99%. So, you see, we are closely related. Then we are closely related to from human to human. Then we are to humans to chimpanzees. However, there is much more similarity. 97% is a lot. But when you compare the human to the human, it is 99%. So there is only that one distinction in our human that makes us different, like look different the way we are now. However, because we are of the same species, we are 99% related in terms of the composition of our DNA or the sequences of the amino acids of a human species. I think you understand now how you say humans are related, how you say humans are related to other species. It is because they check the amino acids or the DNA composition of those particular species. So, right. And then I want us to look at this. There's a question. Okay, 1.6. I would like for you to take some time to read this. So come read with me. Scientists compare the number of differences in the amino acid sequence to see how closely related species are. Fewer differences in the amino acids mean the species are more closely related. So this is what we've just spoken about to say. If there are few differences between the amino acids of the two species, it means those two species are closely related. But if there are more differences, it means those species are not closely related. Now, the cytochrome C is a protein that occurs in many species. Okay, now they're telling us about this protein. Now, the amino acid sequence of this protein differs between the species. So, the amino acid that makes up this protein. Remember, the amino acids are the building blocks of the proteins. And what makes the proteins is DNA protein synthesis. You remember from the first term. So, the amino acid that makes up this cytochrome C, we are told that they differ between the species. The table below shows the number of differences in the amino acid sequences of the three species, species A, species B, species C. So they are comparing them. When they checked the amino acid difference between species A to species B, they found 11. The number was 11. Between species A and species C, the number of the differences was 3. So, from this information, you can already tell which species is closely related to species A. Is it species C or species B? Remember, we said the less differences means the organisms are closely related. But the more differences, it means the organisms are not closely related. But they may be related, but not as close as those ones that have fewer differences. Then species B compared to species C, there were 10 differences. So this is our data that we have. Now, what type of evidence for evolution is being used in this table? Because they are talking about the amino acids, and you know that amino acids, you must know the genetic makeup and you must check the DNA and all of that. This, you cannot get this information without delving into that. So what type of evidence can we say this is for evolution? Right. This is genetic evidence. Why do we say it's genetic evidence? Because they are dealing with what? The makeup of the protein. So protein synthesis, we know you have to know the genetic makeup of a DNA. We are talking about DNA, so which is genetic evidence. Right. Question number 2, still the same. You are saying species A and B, 11 differences. Species A and C, 3 differences. Species B and species C, 10 differences. So, give the letter of the species A, B, and C. That should appear at the positions 1, 2, and 3 in the diagram below. Now, this diagram is a diagram that is showing you a phylogenetic tree or the tracing of the common ancestry of a particular organism. So, knowing this information, what are you going to put here at 1 and 2? So you see 1 and 2, are they closely related? Or is it 1 and 3 more closely related? From these numbers, you can already see that 1 and 2, they are closely related. So from our table, which organisms are more closely related? So it is organism species A and species C. So you can put A here and C here. Or you can start with C and put A and say C and A, no matter what, they are the ones which are closely related. However, they are still related to species B because they share a common ancestor. Because of this information here, all of them came from this common ancestor. So you see how you answer this question. You check the numbers. Which ones has the more difference? These ones have less difference because it's 3. The difference here is 3. But these ones together with this one, the difference is 10. So it's too much. So we can say A. Okay, your answer will be A. At 1, you have A. At 2, you have C. At 3, you have B. Or you can start with C. At position 1, you can have C. Position 2, you can have A. And then position 3, you have B. So you checked the differences and checked how closely related each one of them are to one another. Right. Here's another interesting question. The table below shows the number of differences in the amino acid sequence of the protein albumin in 4 species of primates. So you see now there are 4 species. So you want to check the differences of this particular protein albumin in all these 4 different species. So what are the species? You have species 1, the human, the gorilla, the gibbon, and the monkey. Those are the 4 species. So when you compare the human to the monkey, remember you compare like this. Human to monkey, there were 32 differences. Human to gibbon, there were 14. Human to gorilla, there were 8. The human to human, obviously there will be 0. Gorilla to monkey, 32. Gorilla to gibbon, 14. Gorilla, 0. Gibbon to monkey, 32. Gibbon, you can't. Monkey to monkey, okay, it's the same. So you've compared the numbers of the amino acid sequences of all 4. Now, which 2 species are likely to have separated most recently according to the results on the table? So the ones that might have separated most recently are the ones that will have the least number of differences in the amino acids. So which one is that? Yes, it is the gorillas and the humans. Why? Because the difference there is 8 and it is the least amount of differences. So it has less or fewer differences. Because it has fewer differences, it means it is closely related. I think now you understand how scientists came to the conclusion to check how closely related organisms are using the amino acids or using the genetic evidence. Then we continue with such questions to say, the amino acid sequence of hemoglobin molecules are routinely used to determine how closely related different species are to each other. So they use the sequence of hemoglobin molecules. The following table shows the amino acid sequence of a small portion of hemoglobin of various species. Now, this is just the sequence of amino acid. Remember with the amino acid, when you were doing DNA, we said there's no need for you to study the names. The names will always be given. Even here, you don't need to study the names. You don't need to remember. It is a question that you have to read with understanding with what is happening. Just read it in context. The humans, the amino acid of hemoglobin, of a small portion of hemoglobin, the sequence was lysine, glycine, his, and iso. Okay, let's just talk to them as they are here, because you might not also remember the full names. It's lys, glu, his, iso. Now you've checked. Okay, that is the sequence of these amino acids on a short molecule of hemoglobin. Then for the horse, it is arch, lys, his, lys. For gorillas, is the lys, is the glus, is the his, is the lys. Now you try to check which one follows a similar sequence closely to the other one. Then you check the chimpanzees, is the lys, is the glus, is the his, is the iso. Okay? Now already you can see the sequence on the human and on the gorilla and on the chimpanzee, almost the same. And then also the human and the chimpanzee, check, there's something happening there. I don't want to tell you. Then the zebra, the sequence will be arch, lys, his, and arch. And then the question would be, assuming that the amino acid sequence is the same for the rest of the molecule. So this was a short part that was taken, but now they want you to say, assume that that is the sequence that it follows. Which two species are most closely related? So you already have the answer here. Look, this one and this one. Lys, glu, his, iso. Lys, glu, his, iso. So the sequence of the amino acid are the same. So it means the humans and the chimpanzees are the ones that are closely related. So when you get a question, don't rush into writing an answer without understanding what is happening in a question. So you see, it's so much easier now to answer because you've interpreted the question correctly. All right, moving on to the next question. Give the letters of the diagram that represent homologous structures. Remember, we said homologous comparative anatomy is also used as evidence for evolution. Now, the diagram below shows the limb of various animals. So this is the forelimb of a bat. This is a limb of an octopus. This is a limb of an insect. Now, this is a limb of a crocodile. Now they say to you, give only the letters of the diagram that represent homologous structures. Homologous structures are the ones that share what? Similar sequence or the similar arrangement. So what is going to be that one? A and C. So you see A here, we've spoken about this actually in our example. You see that you can see the arrangement there. It's similar to the arrangement here. So this one is exactly like the one that we did in our example. So A and C, and look at where the mark is. You have 2 marks at the end. So you don't get a mark for writing A or writing C. You get the mark at the end for writing both of them, because both of them are the ones that gives us homologous structures. Then, describe how homologous structures provide evidence for evolution. How do you think homologous structures provide evidence for evolution? Organisms that have similarities in the structure indicate common ancestry. So these two, because they have similarities in their structures, they indicate that they arose from a common ancestor. Now, besides studying homologous structures, name 2 other sources that scientists use as evidence for evolution. Now, this one is where you can just have a field trip and be happy. Fossil records, biogeography, or genetics. Those are the 2 that can be used for, those are the 3 that can also be used to support the theory of evolution. Then we come to the sources of variation. Organisms are not the same. Even organisms of the same species are not the same. Why? It is because of variation. Now we want to check what brings variation in all these organisms. So we talk about sources of variation. We're going to look at the first one. The first source of variation is mutation. What is mutation? It is a sudden, unexpected change in the genetic structure or in the DNA of a cell. So if you look at this, the sequence of amino acids, and then you check these nitrogenous bases. Remember, CAT, 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 those are nitrogenous bases, but they give us amino acids. These will be our amino acids that will result from these. From the triplet bases of the DNA, remember, they will go into become mRNA, mRNA to tRNA. tRNA brings the required amino acid. So these are the amino acids that we find here at the bottom. However, if something happens that, like a replacement of a single nucleotide, you see this C here, the A was supposed to be an A here, so CAT, but it became CCT. This is caused by a mutation. Now, this mutation is going to lead to what? To an incorrect amino acid that is going to be formed. So, you see here, it was histamine that was formed, but after mutation has taken place, proline is going to be the amino acid that is going to be formed, therefore leading to an organism that has a different protein. So that different protein brings variation. So mutation plays a role in bringing variation in this format. And then another source is meiosis, number 2. You did meiosis in grade at the beginning of the term 1. So you saw that during prophase 1, crossing over takes place where the chromatids of homologous chromosomes touch at a point called chiasma and they exchange genetic material, and you end up with chromosomes like this. And at the end of the process of meiosis, you end up with gametes or 4 gametes that are different or that have different genetic makeup. So that is also how variation is brought. We've spoken about that. Right. The third source of variation is random fertilization. So what is random fertilization? When the gametes are arranged in this way, for the mother, and these are the gametes for the father, the chances of these gametes of the father fertilizing these ones of the egg and getting this particular offspring with this type of a genetic makeup or a genotype, this brings variation because this particular gamete or offspring will have a different genetic makeup than this one. You would have this one. So fertilization happens randomly. The sperm cell does not choose which gamete of the female is going to, or there are millions and millions of sperm cells. So they can fertilize one gamete, but each sperm cell, remember, is carrying a different genetic makeup. So obviously the gametes of the offspring are going to be different. This is the reason why all of you with your siblings are not the same. Even if you are from the same parent, it is because the sperm cells that fertilize to make you is not the same sperm cell that fertilize to make your brother or your sister, because of the genetic makeup that is different for each sperm cell. So that is called random fertilization. Then it brings about that variation. Another form is random mating. So organisms choose who they want to mate with. They are not predetermined. So that random choosing of who you want to mate with, you are made with someone that you don't know their genetic makeup. So that is random. That brings genetic variation also. Then these are the questions that you can also follow. Evidence for hominid cultural evolution can be found in the fossil record. This would include what? Those ones that are for cultural is what? The presence of stone tools. So you can see that there were stone tools that were used. Then they can give cultural evidence. Or there were writings on the wall or any other artifact that you can find to prove that these organisms used these particular tools or cultural evidence. Then variation within a species is introduced through what? Through mitosis and meiosis. Right. And then study the list of processes below. Mutation, DNA replication, meiosis, random fertilization. Which of the following processes are regarded as the source of variation for evolution? So you will check which ones are going to give us evolution, variation for evolution. It is B. So it is mutation, it is meiosis, and random fertilization. So those are the ones that are going to give us variation for evolution. Then we're going to deal with our last part, which is types of variation. Things are different, but there are two types of major variations. Those are continuous variation. What do we mean by continuous variation? Continuous variation comprises of those characteristics where there is a range of intermediate, you can say middle, phenotypes. Example, height, skin color, hair color. What do we mean by that? When we say this is a continuous variation, no two people share the same height. You see here the height is going up, down, right? So you have no specific to say. People, it's either they are tall or short. No, there is something in between tall and short here. So this is continuous variation because it does not say only tall or only short. There is something in the middle. So there is an intermediate. Skin color, you can't say people are all black or white. Even with this learners here, you see there is something in between. There is brown, there is tan, there is all sorts of colors between black and white. So that is an example of a continuous variation. Just remember that there is an intermediate phenotype. Then we want to move to discontinuous. Now, discontinuous variation are those characteristics that fall into distinct categories. It's either or. It's either you are black or white. But with color, let's not make an example. So let us look at these examples. Blood groups. Blood groups have distinct. You have only 4 blood groups. It's either you are blood group A, you are blood group B, or blood group AB, or blood group O. There is no other intermediate here. It's distinct. Then you can check with the earlobes also. There are people with unattached or detached earlobes here, like this one, or those ones that are attached. So it's either this or this. There is no middle here. So this is discontinuous. The ability to roll the tongue. It's either you are able to roll it or you are not. You are not able to roll it. So you see, with discontinuous variation, it is a distinct. It's either or. Either or. So I hope you understand now what is continuous variation and discontinuous variation. Then these are some of the properties. Now the differences. Properties. No distinct categories for continuous variation, because here there is a lot that is, there's something in middle. There's no limit on the value. You can't say people are black or white, or they are tall or short. There's no limit. It can just go in between. It tends to be quantitative. It deals with the numbers. However, discontinuous categories, it has distinct. It's either or, either or. Then there is no in between here. It tends to be qualitative. Then examples of continuous are height, weight, rate, heart rate, finger length, leaf length. You can think of all things that are not the same. They are just not the same. Then here, it's either you can do tongue rolling or not with discontinuous. Fingerprints, you have them, they are yours, they are only yours. Eye color, it's either you have a blue one or a red one or a pink one or no, a brown one, a black one, or a blue one or green one. So it's distinct. There's no color that is between blue and green or gray or brown and black. So they are distinct. Right, and then also the blood groups, because we say it's either you are A or you are B or you are AB or you are O. Then a graph that can represent continuous is this type of graph. A graph that can represent discontinuous is the one that you stop. It's a bar graph. They are independent. Then continuous is controlled by a lot of genes in the environment. Then this one, discontinuous, is controlled by a few genes. So these are examples of variation and discontinuous and discontinuous variation. So we've come to the end of our lesson, but I would like you to take home this homework with you just on continuous and discontinuous. I will leave the homework on the board. However, I would like to thank you so much for watching this lesson, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.